us today during this first webinar of our series. My name is Sokol Vakar with the United Nations Statistical Institute from Asia and the Pacific, and I'll be facilitating our discussions over the next 3 days as we go through the program that we put together. So I hope all of you can hear me okay, and I hope everybody, as I mentioned, has joined the room of their choosing as far as the interpretation is concerned, whether it's in Russian or in English. I'll try to talk a little bit slow to give a chance to our interpreters to keep up with the materials and the conversations over the next 2 hours that we will be together. Before going into some of the housekeeping details and some of the logistics for the next 3 days, I would like us to move first to the first agenda item, which is a short opening that we have from some of our senior colleagues that have joined us here today. So that without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Sharma, who is the director here at the Statistical Institute for Asia and the Pacific, for her opening remarks. Dr. Sharma joined us here at SEEA recently. Prior to joining SEEA, she was Director General of the National Statistical Office in India. She has almost 35 years of experience in the field of statistics in the National Statistics Office in India and various other ministries of government in India. So it is my pleasure to again introduce Dr. Sharma and give her the floor for some welcome remarks for this webinar series. Dr. Sharma.
Thank you, Sokol, and good morning all of you. I feel so honored to be here and welcoming you. And good morning, good afternoon to my colleagues who are in Bangkok, who are in Tokyo, and I welcome all the participants from Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Russian Federation, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan to this webinar series on selected topics in environmental accounting during 12-14 October 2021, organized jointly by the Statistics Division of the UNESCAP, SEEA, and Russian Federation Federal State Statistics Service, ROSSTAT. Now we all know this is a very, very important webinar series because of the topic which is going to be discussed. Some of you may be, it may be an introductory one for you all, or for some it may be like a series where you have attended certain webinars, certain e-learning courses on this. So, and we are all aware that like measuring the relationship between human activities and environment is of high policy relevance these days, and countries, most of the countries, I'll say all the countries, have realized that there is a lot more which needs to be done to protect nature, and we need to live with nature rather than overexploit it. At the end of the, even at the international levels, there are several high-profile agreements, agendas, where the SDGs, the climate change, the biodiversity, they are all in the major talks and discussions, and environment is at the foundation of sustainable development and well-being of present and future generations. All these agreements, most of you must have read, must have seen, have measurement frameworks that require more work by national statistical systems to provide relevant data needed not only for policy making, but also for other users such as researchers and the public at large. And I'm sure that as you people are doing your statistical work in your statistical offices, you must have realized that now all of us are collectively working towards the achievement of the SDGs, and in that, monitoring is a very, very important thing, because only what can be measured can be monitored. And so to that extent, I think all of us are collectively working towards that goal. So the NSOs need the data, the policymakers need the data, and also our researchers and the public at large, they also need the data. And for that, NSOs will have, they are probably the first port of embarkment, that how they will get the data and how then it will be used by the policymakers, how it will be used by the researchers and also by the public at large. So NSOs need to coordinate with other institutions for their expertise, as also data available in other ministries, especially when compiling the environment data, because if you see the environment data, you will see that, and if you see the SDG indicators, if you see indicators which are going to be discussed during the course of these 3 days, you will see that, yeah, there is a lot of need for data. Some of it is available, but as you know, statisticians working in NSOs, we will have to ensure that how that can be harnessed and it can be put in the regular framework of our data needs, and it can be compiled, collected at a given periodicity. So, and while doing so, as I have just said, that it is not only the traditional, the administrative data or the survey data, we'll also have to really dig and see some of the non-traditional data sources which we will be needing for our future data needs. And this 3-day webinar series will focus on the system of environment account, as Sokol was briefly mentioning. And the SEEA, we know it prescribes to international standards for compiling the data for environment, ecosystems, and the relationship with the economy. Before I stop, I will really like to thank and I take this opportunity to express my gratitude to the Russian Federation for providing the funding for the project aimed at improving statistics for SDGs in the countries of Central Asia, under which this webinar is organized. And definitely voluntary contributions from member states are of great importance, and especially during this time when the demand for support on data and statistics for SDGs is increasing day by day, while the regular budget of United Nations remains stretched. I would also like to thank in advance colleagues from Statistics Netherlands, European Commission, UK Office of National Statistics, and Basque Center for Climate Change, who would be sharing their expertise during the webinars. Thank you very much, colleagues, for that. I would like to appreciate the hard work put in by colleagues Rike, Jan Smith, Shimizu-san, Sokol. Sokol has been really working tirelessly, and Shuji, and Natalia Shashlova and other colleagues from ROSSTAT to organize such an important webinar series. We all know that the topic for this is SEEA, and as I was saying, that everything cannot be discussed, but definitely very many important things will be discussed, and you will be sensitized to those things. And SEEAP and partners value our common goals of statistical capacity building and look forward to a successful run of this webinar series. Thank you very much, and I hope you will find the sessions useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharma, for those opening remarks. Next, we will hear from our other co-organizers, the colleagues at ROSSTAT. In particular, we're pleased to have today with us Ms. Natalia Shashlova, who is currently the head of the Department of Agricultural and Environment Statistics at ROSSTAT. She has worked in government structures for more than 40 years. Ms. Shashlova is also the deputy head of the United Nations Economic Commissions for Europe Joint Task Force on Environmental Statistics and Indicators. She's a member of national and international expert working groups and commissions in the field of agriculture and environmental statistics. She is also the deputy head of the interagency working group for the creation of the roadmap for the implementation of priority accounts of the system of environmental economic accounting in the Russian Federation. So we have a lot of great experience here. Ms. Shashlova, please, your opening remarks.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги.
Greetings, good afternoon, dear colleagues.
Мне представилась возможность
It's a great
приветствовать
opportunity to
всех
welcome
участников и
all the
организаторов
participants
всех
and
вебинаров
organizers of the series of webinars on the system on
Это для меня
ecological
очень
economic
большая
accounting.
честь.
It's a great honor for
Проведение
me
подобных
because
мероприятий
holding such
очень
events is very
полезно.
useful
Дает
since it
возможность
provides an
общаться с
opportunity to
экспертами в
communicate with
области
leading experts in the
природно-экономического
field of
учета, служит
ecological economic
мощным
accounting
стимулом
and serves a powerful
продвижению вперед
incentive
по
for
практическому
moving forward
освоению
in
СПЛ.
the
И, в
practical
свою
development
очередь,
of
практические
SEEA
занятия
and
помогают
practical knowledge helps
совершенствовать
to improve
методологию
the
построения
methodology
счетов.
for
И,
constructing of
конечно,
accounts.
служит эффективной
And of course, it serves an
площадкой для
effective
обмена
platform
опытом
for
стран
the
в
exchange of
деле
experience
составления и
between
использования
countries in the
счетов.
preparation
Каждый из
and the
нас
use of accounts.
продвинулся по каждому
All of
направлению,
us
где-то
has
больше,
embarked on
где-то
different
меньше. Поэтому
directions in a
такая
lesser
площадка
or a
очень
further degree.
полезна и
So this
эффективна.
platform is
Меня
very
радует
useful and
вовлеченность
effective.
в
I'm pleased with
вебинары
the
и
involvement
представителей
of
природоохранных
representatives of
и
environmental and
экономических
economical
ведомств,
departments
научного
and
сообщества.
also the scientific
Такое
community.
представительство
Such
участников предполагает тесное
representation
межведомственное взаимодействие. И
supposes
наша
close
практика
interagency
показывает, что для
cooperation. And
построения
practice
счетов нужны
shows that to build
сведения,
accounts,
разрабатываемые
we need
как
data
природоохранными
that is developed
ведомствами,
by environmental,
финансовыми ведомствами, таможенными,
financial,
сельскохозяйственными,
customs, agriculture, and
рыбохозяйственными
fisheries departments
ведомствами в странах, а также
in
с
different
привлечением
countries,
научных
and
исследований.
also with the
Как вы
participation of
знаете,
the
мировое
scientific
сообщество
community.
прошло
The
длительный
world
путь от
community,
разработки
as you well know,
международного
has come a long
стандарта
way
СПЭО
from the
до его
development of an
поэтапного
international CEA
внедрения в странах.
SEA standard.
Число стран-участников этого
The number
процесса
of
растет с
countries
каждым годом.
participating in
И
this
это
process is
очень
growing
радует.
year by year. And it's
На
I'm very
начало
happy about it.
2021 года
As of
89 стран или
2021,
65% числа читавших
89 countries or 65% of the
ведут
number of
работу
countries
по
reporting to
применению
the UN
СПЭО.
statistics divisions are
Российская
working
Федерация тоже
in the application
вовлечена в
of
эту работу.
SEA. And the Russian
Задачи по
Federation is also
внедрению СПЭО в
involved in this
России
work.
включены в стратегию
The
развития
tasks for the
Росстата до
implementation of
2024 года.
SEA in Russia are included in the
Что
ROSSTAT
нами
development
сделано
strategy
в
up
настоящее
to
время?
2024.
Мы разработали
We
межведомственную
have
дорожную карту
developed an
целый
interagency
план
roadmap
мероприятий по
for the
внедрению отдельных
implementation
счетов
of
СПЭО.
individual
И
accounts
сейчас
of the
она на стадии
SEA,
утверждения в
and
правительстве Российской Федерации.
it will be adopted by the
Вне
government soon.
ведомства, ответственные за
It
построение
contains
отдельных
the
счетов.
list of departments responsible for construction
Важно
of separate
отметить, что
accounts,
ROSSTAT здесь
and ROSSTAT
отводится
is
координирующая
assigned
роль.
a coordinating role.
Больше всего мы
Most of
продвинулись в
all,
построении
we have
счетов
advanced
активов и
in the construction of
стоимостном
asset
выражении.
accounts
В
in terms of
настоящее
value.
время в составе
Currently,
баланса
the
активов и
following
пассивов
natural
нефинансовых
assets are
активов
reflected
отражаются
in the balance
следующие
sheet of
природные
assets and
активы.
liabilities of
Это
non-financial
минеральные и
assets. These
энергетические
are
полезные ископаемые,
minerals and
некультивируемые
energy minerals,
биологические ресурсы,
non-cultivated
части лесных и
biological
охотничьих, и
resources like
водные
forests and
ресурсы.
hunting and water resources.
Росстатом
ROSSTAT has
разработаны и
also
размещены на
developed and
сайте
posted on
3
its website
экспериментально
3
построенных
experimental
счета
accounts.
по
These
экологическим
are on
налогам, по экологическим субсидиям и
environmental
платежам и по расходам
taxes
на
and
охрану
environmental
окружающей
subsidies
среды
and the
по
cost
основным
of environment
показателям.
protection.
Что следует отметить, что наши планы до конца 2023
It is
года
planned that by the end of
разработать и
2023,
разместить
we are planning to develop and place on the unified information system
данные по
data on the
следующим
following
по
accounts:
потокам водных ресурсов,
flows of water
по
resources,
выбросам в атмосферный воздух,
the
по
emissions
активам
into the air,
ресурсов древесины,
assets of
по
timber
экологическим
resources,
налогам и платежам, по
environmental
экологическим
taxes and
субсидиям
payments,
и подобным
environmental
трансферам. А
subsidies
уже
and
к
similar
2025
transfers. And
году
by the end of
планируется
2025,
разработать счет
we plan
отходов
to develop
производства и
an
потребления,
account of
счет
production and consumption,
экологических товаров и услуг,
account of environmental goods and
расходов на
services,
охрану окружающей среды в
account
полном
for expenses of
объеме, как это
environmental protection in full,
рекомендовано в
as is
центральной
recommended
основе СПЭО,
by
и
the
счет
central
активов водных
framework.
биологических ресурсов. Многие из вас тоже провели большую работу по изучению и внедрению СПЭО в своих странах. Сегодня мы все с вами поделимся, и вы с нами поделитесь своим опытом, своими достижениями в этом направлении. Желаю всем продуктивной работы на вебинарах и надеюсь, что полученные знания помогут нам двигаться вперед по освоению, можно сказать, такой своего рода колондайка по научным знаниям и опыту и получения колоссальной информации для расчетов показателей целей устойчивого развития. Спасибо большое и успехов нам с вами.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much from me as well, Ms. Shashlova, for your introduction remark. I think I just wanted to highlight a couple of points here. First, congratulations on the great progress. It's great to hear of all the plans that you have at ROSSTAT to produce many of the accounts that you listed. And I also wanted to emphasize what you emphasized as well with the need for collaboration across institutions, not only within government, but also academia and more broadly. And last but not least, encourage other colleagues as we go through today in particular to share your experiences and your thoughts and your views on the implementation of the SEEA in your country. So thank you very much. Again, to Dr. Sharma and Ms. Shashlova as well for their opening remarks and their thoughts on the SEEA and the next 3 days and the importance of this topic. Now, without further ado, let me quickly, before jumping to today's agenda, share some thoughts about what we will be doing together over the next 3 days so that everybody is aware. I just wanted to first encourage everybody to type in your questions and comments into the chat box. We already are having colleagues keep an eye on that to make sure that we respond to that in a timely fashion. There will also be an opportunity to make interventions, raise comments, questions that you might have orally at the end of the first hour as well as towards the end of the second hour. So either you can type your questions, your interventions, comments, or you can wait till the end and then we can do that as well. The plan for today, as you might have seen from our agenda, is to focus on the SEEA Central Framework. For many of you, a lot of this material will be a little bit of a review, but we have also many new colleagues that are joining us for the first time, so hopefully there will be some new material here and there for everybody to pick up on. Tomorrow and Thursday, we're very pleased to have with us, as Dr. Sharma mentioned, some of the world experts in the area of ecosystem accounts, and those topics will be discussed tomorrow and Thursday. We will also hear from experts on artificial intelligence, some of the latest tools available to statisticians for the compilation of ecosystem accounts. So we have a very exciting agenda and very much
able to start the meeting once participants from Kazakhstan join us. Unfortunately, to this moment of time, they have not connected. And I have been in touch with Sarek and with PB Pool from the ministry to find out.
I apologize. Colleagues, if you would like to take the floor, please just raise your hand. We'll make sure to give you the floor, no problem. Just if you can mute yourself so that everybody can hear, that would be good. So that's the plan for the next 3 days. Again, today we will focus on the overview of the program of work and then go a little bit into the details of water accounts. I know many of you already have some experience with water accounts, so some of this again will be a little bit of an overview and some of it a little bit of a repetition. But again, we'll try to make this interesting and provide some new angles and new insights into this. So without further ado, let me make the first presentation here. We'll focus on a general overview of the SEEA, set the scene for you so that you'll have an idea of what we'll be overall discussing. I also wanted to mention that the presentations have been translated into Russian. Many of you should have, or all of you rather, should have received a link to the website. So if you would like to get the presentations in Russian, you can download them from the website and you can follow along. So let me share my screen here. I hope everybody can see it. Okay, it's just coming up here in a second, so very good. I hope again everybody can see the screen. I'll go here for about 30 minutes or so and then save another 10 minutes for your questions and comments, and then we'll take a stretch break and then carry on. This will be just a broad overview, rather, of the SEEA to put all of this into context of what we are trying to do, just to provide an overall bird's eye view, so to say, of the SEEA and its various components. Before I jump here into the need, let me just thank colleagues at the United Nations Statistics Division. This is my former home, my former position. They contributed to this presentation and provided some of the insight that I'll share with you today. And I also, as you have noticed, we are recording this presentation, so we will share that link with you later as well for future reference. Now, what has given rise to the SEEA? Why have this system to begin with? There is very much a recognition now from everybody that our economic well-being crucially depends on nature. And this is not just about economic well-being, but health and equity and many other goals that society have very much depend on inputs from nature and having a mutually beneficial relationship with nature. Now, the headline indicators such as the GDP, the unemployment rate, and inflation do not capture this vital economic contributions that the environment, that nature is providing to us. And as a result of this lack of information, decision makers do not have access to key information necessary to effectively pursue and track sustainable development. So the SEEA is meant to fill this gap of the system of environmental economic accounting. It's meant to provide the data that policymakers need, and more broadly, other audiences need, in order to make decisions about trade-offs between the various competing uses of the various environmental assets that a country might have. We will talk into detail about some of these topics as we go along here, but this is where the need arises. The SEEA started a long time ago. I think in the academic area, you know, a lot of discussions have been happening over the past 50 years in this area, and if not a little bit longer. And then more into the policy space and international agreements. It started with the conference in 1992 in Rio, where politicians and high-level government leaders very much recognized that GDP, while an important tool in making policy, very much did not provide the complete picture of, in particular, human relationship with the environment. So what is the sort of top-level conceptual framework that we have in mind in the context of the SEEA, i.e. what is the environment economic census as viewed from the accounts? So within the accounts, the economy, the national economy sits within the environment. There are certain natural inputs that the economy uses from the environment. So this would be timber, this would be water, this would be soil, and so on and so forth. So economic units use these natural inputs as part of their economic activities. So economic activities in the context of national accounts, as many of you know, include production, consumption, and accumulation. And these economic activities are undertaken by economic units that we have, and those economic units obviously interact with one another in order to produce goods and services. The economy also includes certain financial instruments, which we do not talk so much about in the context of the SEEA, but taxes and subsidies are one of the topics, one of the instruments that are used within the economy to obviously influence behavior. And as Ms. Shashlova mentioned in her remarks, in Russia, they are already doing some of these accounts related to expenditures and so on and so forth. So we have natural inputs that go from the environment into the economy. We also have ecosystem services that go from the environment rather into the economy, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, as part of the consumption and production and accumulation activities that go on within the economy, obviously there are residuals rather that are generated, right? So we have not only solid waste residuals, but we have emissions to air, we have emissions to water, and so on and so forth. And these residuals flow from the economy to the environment, right? So these are the flows that we have from the environment to the economy, the flows within the economy, and then as part of the, again, production, consumption, and accumulation processes, residuals are generated that flow back into the environment. Now, our economies are nowadays open, obviously, and there are imports and exports that occur with other countries. So the consumption patterns in one country will have an impact will have an impact rather on the environment of other countries as well, and this is where footprint types of indicators are quite important. There are also flows within environments, so these are transboundary environmental flows at the very bottom there that you see. These are not something that we spend too much time in the context of the SEEA because we're very much focused on the environment-economy relationship. So this is sort of the overall top-level view of what we are trying to measure. We're trying to measure what natural inputs and ecosystem services are used by the economy. How are these things used within the economy? So what sectors of the economy are using the various natural inputs? And then what residuals are sent back into the environment. Now, why do we need accounts? The basic premise is that we want to be able to bring together physical flow information with monetary flow information. So we need to provide information on the environment and the economy in a way that is consistent. This allows for environmental data to be integrated with existing system of national accounts measures. So the SEEA and SNA are very much closely linked, even though there are certain differences, obviously, in scope, certain differences in what's included and what's excluded. The structure of the information that we can put together allows for this integration that can be very useful in understanding the relationship between the environment and the economy. We want to be able to provide international comparability. This is, something that's very crucial, especially in the context of some of the more recent developments as far as climate change is concerned, as far as biodiversity is concerned, and more broadly. The system needs to have credibility, and as Dr. Sharma mentioned in her remarks, the SEEA is one of two international statistical standards that we have. So the other one is the system of national accounts. So this is very much documents that are produced through exhaustive consultative processes that allow for this broad credibility to be in place with the inclusion of experts across the board. Because to go back to what Ms. Shashlova was saying, we are working with experts in agriculture, in fisheries, in forest, within government, but also more broadly in academia as well. And then we want to be able to obviously have replicability. This allows for the information to, again, have more credibility and usability. And last but not least, I think it's the link between data and information, right? We want to be able to provide data that can inform, right, that can be used by different audiences for the purposes that they have. And in particular, the main one for us, obviously, is colleagues in line ministries and other institutions that work with environment and economy. So this is why the accounts are needed. They satisfy all these various needs. But the more important one to just emphasize again is the relationship between physical flows in environmental economic accounts with the monetary information that is contained in the system of national accounts. Now, in the past, there has very much been a siloed approach to data collection. A particular agency would be responsible for a particular policy, and then for that policy, certain information, certain monitoring framework might be put in place, and then to inform that monitoring framework, certain data needs to be collected. So you might have your forestry agency collect one set of information, and then you might have the agriculture ministry collect a different set of information, and then you might have the Ministry of Water collect a different set of information, even though there is a lot of overlap. We want to break this silos, and this is what the accounts do. By having a coherent and consistent framework, we can bring together data in the accounts. So we take the basic data and integrate that into accounts, and then as part of that integration into the accounts, we can also produce the indicators that are useful for informing the policies across the board. This has two advantages. One is that obviously data is being used more efficiently. We have a system in place that allows for data to be collected once and used for multiple purposes, but also this allows for different agencies to speak the same language and align policies better, hopefully, right? So that the policies on water reflect well the policies on agriculture and vice versa. So that we don't have competing policies from different agencies that are dealing with similar resources. So the idea is to break the silos and get into a situation where, again, information is being collected using common definitions, common classifications, common methodology, and that will allow for the information to be used for multiple purposes across government agencies. So this is what the accounts aim to do. They aim to break these data silos so that we move into a more integrated space. Now, let me provide some more details about the SEEA. Again, some of this will be very old information for some of you, but it will be new for many others that are joining us here for the first time. So the SEEA, again, is a statistical framework for measuring the environment and its interaction with the economy. Today, we will focus a little bit more on the SEEA Central Framework, which was adopted as an international statistical standard by the UN Statistical Commission in 2012. The second component to it is the SEEA Ecosystem Accounting, which was adopted recently in 2021. And this is a very high-profile document and high-profile work. Even the Secretary General of the United Nations made a speech about this, and very much a useful tool now for bringing together ecosystems into the decision-making process. And last but not least, there is a manual on applications and exceptions, which provides the link with some of the policy areas and also provides some suggestions on good approaches to presenting the data, and also some of the indicators that can be easily compiled from the indicators to show trends on important topics. So let me move on. Now, there are, as I mentioned, the SEEA Central Framework, and we have also the SEEA Ecosystem Accounts, and you might be asking yourself, well, why have two different statistical standards? These are two complementary approaches to measuring the economic contribution of nature into our economies, right? So one approach, which is reflected in the SEEA Central Framework, looks at individual environmental assets and resources. So we look at timber, we look at water, we look at fish, we look at soil. So it is one particular asset, one particular resource. How is that resource removed from the environment? How does that resource flow within the economy? And then how does it go back in terms of residuals? And today we'll talk a little bit more about water in the second half, so you'll get a better sense of when we talk about environmental assets, how that goes about. Now on day 2 and 3, we'll focus on ecosystems, and ecosystems are biotic and abiotic elements that function together, and by this functioning, they provide services which translate into benefits for humans, right? So instead of looking at timber in isolation, in the context of ecosystem, we look at a forest, or we look at a watershed, at a river system, or a cropland, or wetlands. And there are, you know, many other types of ecosystems that might be relevant to your country that are important to measure. We also look, in ecosystems, we take a more holistic approach to collecting the information that is provided by the ecosystem. So assets is one thing, you focus on it, and that is it. On the ecosystems, it's more of a spatial approach where we focus on particular ecosystems and the benefits that are generated from those. So again, these are complementary. These are, you know, it's not one or the other. It depends on the type of questions that you have, and that will guide what priorities you might have. And again, you know, there are a lot of assets and there are a lot of ecosystems. And again, to go back to our introduction from Ms. Shaslova, there are priorities that need to be made. You know, in your country, certain things might be more important than others. So this prioritization is quite important to allow for concrete accounts to be implemented. So this is the two. On the left, SEEA Central Framework. On the right, SEEA Ecosystem Accounts. And again, the main difference between the two is, where do you start from? Do you start from individual assets and resources, or do you take a spatial approach focusing on particular ecosystems that might provide many different services to humans? So here again, this is sort of repeating what I just said. So the SEEA Central Framework reports on the first one, and it measures environmental assets and individual resources and how the economy uses them. And then when we talk about ecosystems, again, we're talking about the services that they provide to the economy and human activities. This provides you a little bit of a overview of the various manuals that are out there to support the work that you might be considering in this space. As you see there, we have the System of National Accounts, which provides the overall accounting framework that is used also in the System of Environmental Economic Accounts. Within the SEEA Central Framework, there has been a lot of work on what we like to call subsystems. So today we will focus on water in the next presentation, but there is a manual on energy. So those of you who are interested in learning more about how to compile energy accounts, you can refer to that. In collaboration with the Food and Agriculture Organization, the United Nations also has put together a manual on agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. There's work ongoing on sustainable tourism, on oceans, which I know oceans is probably not as relevant for some of the countries joining us here today since you are landlocked, but also for the biodiversity. All of these various manuals are fully consistent. They just provide more details on the topics that are discussed in the SEEA Central Framework. Now, we also again have the new System of Environmental Economic Accounts Ecosystem Accounting, which just got recently adopted, and we're very excited about, and you'll learn more about this again tomorrow and the day after. So this provides you sort of an overview of the tools that are available for you in moving into this space. And another resource that is very much available besides us here at SEEA and ESCAP as well is each other, right? You already heard on some of the experience from Russia. I know many of the countries that have joined us here today have already done excellent work in energy accounts and asset accounts for minerals as well. So there is a very big community that continues to work in this space. So you have a lot of resources and a lot of opportunities to learn from one another as well as you continue the compilation of SEEA. Now, some more details on the SEEA Central Framework. Again, we are looking at assets, and the idea is, what do we take from the environment? How do we use it within the economy? And then how do we return it back? Here you see some of the examples: water resources, mineral and energy, timber, fisheries. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about water later on. But again, the idea is you focus on one particular asset, You can do physical supply and use tables, or you can do asset accounts and proceed that way. Now, I will not spend too much time on this because we already discussed this, but the SEEA Central Framework, again, we focus on the natural inputs. We are not worried about the ecosystem services. That's the ecosystem part. Now, let me just provide some quick details on some of the more important aspects of the subsystems that we have of the SEEA. So there are a number of subsystems on water or on energy and so on and so forth. As I mentioned, these are fully consistent with the SEEA. They just provide more details. We already have water, energy, agriculture, forestry, and fisheries that are all available for you to use, and others will be coming down the line depending on country demands, so that more of this is articulated in a way that you can use for the compilation of these accounts. We will not obviously spend too much time on energy, but I thought I'd provide some details on it because this is a little bit close to my heart, since I very much worked on this draft manual when I was in New York, so I thought I'd share with you some of the details behind it. And I know energy is an important topic, not only from a supply and use perspective, but also as an asset. Many of the countries in Central Asia, many of the governments obviously rely on revenue from various energy assets for their budgets and so on and so forth, and also employment. So these resources are quite important in the economic sense for many of the countries that we have here with us today. So the SEEA Energy provides the agreed concepts, definition, classifications, tables, and accounts related to, again, energy supply and use and the stocks of the energy resources. So you have a standard framework that can be used to trace all these things over time. They provide very much useful information on not only the energy products that your country is relying on, but what sectors of the economy are relying on what energy products. And then obviously the physical supply and use information can be linked with the information in the national accounts to get more details on also the monetary flows and bringing the information on the physical side with the monetary side. SEEA Water has three main types of accounts, and we'll talk about some of these in detail later on. We basically focus on physical flow accounts. Basically, we consider the abstraction of water, how the water flows within the economy, and then how the water flows back to the environment. We also have a framework in place for the asset accounts, which describes the hydrological cycles. You have a good sense of what water assets are available in your country and how they can best be managed for the current economic needs and the current demands by households, but also to ensure that future generations obviously will be able to meet their needs as well. Now, many of you know that water, valuation of water is quite a challenging topic, so we will not discuss that much in detail, but there is an opportunity obviously to link the physical flows of the water with the monetary, at least expenditures that households and businesses have on water from the expenditure accounts. All right, so that's just a brief overview again of the SEEA Central Framework. Let me quickly, on ecosystem accounting, I'll be very brief because you will hear a lot more about this over the next 2 days. It's very much a complement to the SEEA Central Framework. So we very much look at environmental assets in a spatial perspective, right? So we have an ecosystem, and we want to measure what ecosystem services humans are getting from particular ecosystems. So the idea is that we very much measure particular assets as far as ecosystems are concerned, what condition they are in, right? How capable are ecosystems provide the services they provide. We also want to measure obviously the services they provide to us, and the services can take a number of forms. It could be flood protection, it could be provisioning services such as timber or wild animals, wild game, and so on and so forth. As these services obviously lead to benefits that we as humans get from the various ecosystems. So these benefits obviously need to be taken into account as far as policies and decision making is concerned, so that ecosystems can be managed in a good way for present and future generations. So let me, for the sake of time, skip these few slides. You'll hear more about this again tomorrow and the day after on how we talk about ecosystem assets, how to measure extent, conditions, and the characteristics, and how those contribute to final economic services, which are a benefit not only to the economy but to society as well, right? Some of the benefits that we get from ecosystems are actually not captured within national accounts at all. And these are some of the things that we'll hear more about in the next 2 days. Let me skip this discussion here because, again, you'll get more about this tomorrow. This is just to give you sort of a top-level overview of things where we are. Oops. Next slide. So again, this is just providing a simple example of the various things where we want to measure in the context of ecosystems. So we have the asset here, which is forest, and there are certain conditions that ecosystem asset has, right? Certain forests are healthier than other forests. One way that we measure the condition of a forest is to look at the soil depth. And the service that it provides is water filtration, and obviously the benefit that we get is clean water, right? And obviously there is a fifth step here with humans actually utilizing that clean water. So we want to be able to measure these things in order to have a good understanding of the services that the ecosystems are providing. Let me, again, for the sake of time, just skip this couple of slides. We'll, again, hear more about them tomorrow. But the idea is that we obviously measure the ecosystem extent, so where these ecosystems are located and how big they are. That's the basic premise. And then ecosystem extent, obviously different layers can be put on it because this is a spatial approach. So if you are interested in recreational services, those layers can be added on top, and recreational services can take a number of formats. You know, particular ecosystems might be used for, let's say, nature walking or you know, other types of recreation that might be important in the context of the ecosystems that you have. And then if you layer that on top with the population, obviously you have a good idea of the access that people have to that recreation. This was adopted as an international statistical standard. Some of the details on valuation need to be worked out, but this is all work in progress, and again, something to look forward to over the next 2 days. Now, let me briefly just provide a little bit of context here about where we are with the implementation. This links very well to what was mentioned earlier. 89 countries are compiling SEEA accounts, along with many of the colleagues that we have here, so we have many experts already with us. On the SEEA, this shows a map of ongoing work here, and many more countries are continuing to pick this up. Now, it is quite important, obviously, that we link the SEEA with the other global initiatives in the policy level. Dr. Sharma, in her remarks, mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, which is one of the initiatives that the SEEA can support, but it's much broader than that, right? We want to be able to, again, collect data once and respond to the needs of as many policy and public needs as possible. And here is just a list of some of the things that you probably have heard about, whether it's the new CBD, the new Convention on Biological Diversity. Currently, actually, the Conference of the Parties is meeting in China to update that particular convention. There is the Convention to Combat Desertification, so you can imagine how something like a land account would be useful in determining how much desertification is going on, how many land changes are going on, and so on and so forth. And then obviously climate change and its link with energy, among others, is very prominent, that thing. So the SEEA can very much support all of these various initiatives in a good way. So we collect data once, and again, we can provide information for multiple initiatives. Here are some more details for you so that you have an appreciation of what can be done. On the SDGs, there are about 240 indicators, give or take, that are part of the 17 goals and 169 targets. And here you have a list of some of the, all the SDGs rather, all the 9 SDGs for which the SEEA accounts can provide information. So we will talk today a little bit about water, clean water and sanitation. When compiling physical supply use tables or water emission accounts, some of the indicators in Goal 6 will be informed by those accounts. In the context of biodiversity, as I mentioned, actually right now there is the new, the current COP is being held. This will be an update of the Aichi targets, and the SEEA will very much feature prominently as one of the measurement frameworks for biodiversity, for the new biodiversity agreement, I should say, that will come out. There is already strong support for it, and I'm sure that once it is adopted, the SEEA will be the measurement framework that is utilized to inform many of the indicators in the biodiversity space. And then climate change, again, some of the SEEA central framework type of accounts are very useful here, including those on emissions, including those on energy, and including those on expenditures, right? Expenditures is quite an important topic. Again, having the accounts in place allows you to inform those discussions on expenditures for mitigation and adaptation to climate change. Let me move on again for the sake of time here. So here, lastly, I just wanted to quickly mention some applications, because we have talked a lot about some very vague ideas and very top level sort of, okay, it sounds great, but what has been done already, and what are some of the interesting questions that have been answered by countries as they have applied the SEEA. So here is a mapping of ecosystem services in China. They looked at a few services that are of interest to them, and whether it's food production of particular ecosystems or carbon sequestration, soil retention, sandstorm prevention, and so on and so forth. So they were able to actually generate some of these very interesting visuals, some very interesting maps that you can have a good understanding, okay, these are some of the important services that are being provided, and where are those services being provided. So very clear and very easy to communicate with policymakers of where, you know, the carbon sequestration is happening, for example, in China as far as ecosystems services are concerned, and so on and so forth, right? So this is one example of a concrete output. Here is another one on from South Africa. So this was considering the health of river ecosystems, and you'll see the decline that has happened over the 12-year period, roughly between the end of 1990s and then, you know, early in 2011. You see how the condition basically of the rivers has changed in the country from the two time periods. And again, this is very easy to communicate, very clear to communicate to users. One of the things that we talked about earlier as well was this environmentally adjusted aggregate. So we want to be able to complement the GDP, right? We want to be able to provide depletion adjusted measures to GDP, and Mexico has done some work on this area, and they have realized that total environmental costs amounted up to 6% of the GDP in 2019, but there was an improvement in 2016 that was down to 4.5%. So they have looked at a number, obviously, of items. These are obviously in their context the more important ones, including air pollution, water pollution, the soil degradation by solid waste, and so on and so forth. And this is the last example that I wanted to share with you. This is from the Netherlands, and this is about decoupling. This is very much an important type of indicator that can be easily derived from the accounts, whether it's SEEA Central Framework asset accounts or physical supply news tables, or from an ecosystems perspective as well, because we can link this with national accounts data in an easy way. And decoupling basically means that the economic variable is hopefully increasing, right? We have more GDP, we have more employment, while the environmental pressure type of indicator, in this case greenhouse gases or carbon emissions or other variables of interest, are decreasing. And again, you see in this case here that for some of these we have absolute decoupling. So if you look at GDP and ammonia, CH4, I hope I'm correct with my chemistry, you'll see that GDP has increased from 1990 all the way to 2012, but the generation of ammonia has decreased over time. For some of the other variables, you know, greenhouse gas emissions and GDP, obviously we don't have absolute decoupling, we have relative decoupling because greenhouse gas emissions for the most part have continued to increase. So I know that took a little bit longer, but I wanted to give you a flavor of some of the things that we can do with the SEEA and some of the opportunities that are out there. And also, again, provide a top-level sort of view of what we are after. We will go into details for water accounts next, so we'll get into more technical discussions soon. But again, I thought it was important, especially for those of you who are new to this area, to hear the reasons why we do this, to hear why we do the SEEA, and also get a flavor for some of the, again, good examples that can be easily communicated, that are policy relevant, that might pique your interest to say, oh, okay, these are some of the accounts that we should be working on in our country as well. Here, this one from the Netherlands is their air emissions account. So the Netherlands produces an air emission account on a yearly basis, and they have used that information along, obviously, with GDP and employment. So let me stop right there with this first presentation, and thank you for your patience and understanding. And bearing with me here. May I suggest that we take, I know we were scheduled to take a break in about 5 minutes. I do not know if we have any questions already posted in the chat, so I'll, let me quickly scroll through here, and I would like to ask my colleagues if there are any questions or concerns. I don't think we have any questions, but if anybody would like to take the floor to raise any questions or share your experience on some of the accounts that you might have compiled as well, please do raise your hand, and we'd be happy to give you the floor. All right, that's quite okay. You can, think about it over the coffee break here, tea break, stretch break, and come back with some question or comment. So may I suggest then we take a break as we planned, 2 minutes extra, it's okay. So we take a break till 10 minutes past the hour and come back when we will discuss water accounts. So we will go into a little bit more technical details on water cycle, hydrological cycle, and so on and so forth, and physical supply and use tables. So in the meanwhile, if something comes up as a question, please put it in the chat or raise your hand. But for the time being, let's take a stretch break and come back in 10 minutes, well, 12 minutes, so that we can start with our next session on time. Thank you very much, everybody, and see you in 10 minutes. All right. Hello again, everybody. I hope you can hear me okay. And welcome back to our second and final session for the day, where we will focus on water accounts. This is an important topic for many of the countries here because water is an important natural asset, but also water is a resource that households and obviously the economy rely on extensively, right? So this is an important topic for us to consider. All right. So a short recap on the plan for today. We will focus from the environmental asset perspective, right? So today the focus again is central framework asset accounts. Water is also an important component of ecosystem accounting. As you saw earlier, provisioning of water is an important service that many ecosystems provide. So you can consider water in the context of services that are provided by ecosystems. We'll again hear more about that perspective tomorrow and Thursday, but these two are very much complementary approaches. Today we focus on one, tomorrow you'll get a sense of the other. Now, I mentioned earlier that we have an SEEA, water, which is also part of the broader suite of manuals on environmental economic accounting, and I think if I had to mention one thing as far as the value of SEEA water, what is it trying to do, is that it facilitates trade-off analysis between competing water uses. So if you had to make a pitch in the elevator with a high-level senior official about why water accounts are important, I think this is a very important point that you might wish to use. As you know, water can be used for multiple purposes, and there are trade-offs that need to occur. So if in your country there is a policy to enhance food production, obviously that will require water resources to be used for food production. But there could also be a desire to enhance tourism and support tourism. So in that sense, not only is water required for tourists themselves as far as the consumption of water is concerned, but also it might be the case that particular water assets such as lakes could be supporting tourism activities themselves. So should we use this particular water in the lake to support food production, or leave it as is and have it support tourism activity? As you know, water is also important in the context of energy. Many of the countries here rely on hydropower for their energy needs. So again, there are multiple competing uses. How can we support that decision making of the policymakers as far as the water is concerned in order to make the best use we can of the assets that we have? So this is sort of the top level pitch why compiling water accounts is important, because it does facilitate the trade-off analysis that we might need to do in order to support decision making in our country. So let me go a little bit into more details now why this competing water uses are important, and also provide some more policy sort of details on the water accounts. So we can think about four broad categories of why doing SEEA and water accounts in particular is important in the context of policy making. In the first quadrant there is about improving water supply and sanitation services. So this refers to all the policies that aim to ensure that the population has access to safe water, as well as the means to dispose of wastewater. Water supply and sanitation services are provided through the water supply and sewer networks, and are operated obviously by the utilities. So making sure that businesses, households have reliable clean water supply and sanitation services is quite important. I think for many of the countries here, this is not such a big issue. Many countries do have the infrastructure in place, but providing that reliable service might be something that is important. The other thing to keep in mind is that there are costs associated, right, with providing the water supply sanitation services. So understanding the infrastructure needs and understanding who pays for those infrastructure needs as far as water supply and sanitation services is concerned is very much important in the context of many countries. And last but not least, I think, in many cases we have losses that happen in our water supply systems, or there might be thefts that happen in the water supply system. Understanding where those losses and where those thefts might occur would be, again, a very useful piece of information in order to design systems that better deal with those issues. The second quadrant here is referring about policies regarding managing water supply and demand. As you know, in many countries there are water shortages, so there is a need to improve water allocation in order to properly satisfy the needs of society, but also without compromising the needs of future generations or the environment. So it is important that we monitor the amount of water that is being allocated to different uses, whether it's agriculture, manufacturing, households, but also the environment, right? The environment itself needs water. So having a good understanding of the supply and the demand of water is quite important in order to do it. An important component of managing supply and demand of water is productivity of water, right? So if certain economic activities are generating more value added and using less water, obviously there might be an opportunity to support those activities further, especially in cases where water is not abundant, because obviously we want to generate as much economic activity and value added as possible within the limited water resources that we might have. The third quadrant here talks about improving the state of the environment and water resources. So it refers to policies that aim to preserve or improve the quality of water resources and aquatic ecosystems. So it's about measuring things like emissions to water, right? How much emissions are discharged into the water? How polluted is the water? How much infrastructure is needed in order to clean that water, to treat the water so that it can be returned to the environment in of a quality that can be used by the environment in a good way, but also about reusing the water for other processes as well within the economy. So that's sort of the third area of policy where water accounts are very informative. The last quadrant here is adapting to extreme meteorological and hydrological events. So there are many policies, I think, now in countries that deal with water-related disasters, and this can take both extremes, right? It could be that we have floods and abundance of water at a period of time, but also there could be droughts. And I know in many of the countries that we have here today, droughts in certain areas could very much be an issue. And this obviously needs to inform things such as where levees are built, where dams, how do you manage your various rivers and water infrastructure in order to make sure that policies are put in place to better adapt to these extreme events. And this is obviously closely linked to climate change, right? Climate change is exacerbating a lot of these extreme events. They are occurring more often, and they are occurring at higher magnitude, higher power. So it's quite important that we measure these flows in order to have a good understanding of how to respond to these. So at the center of this, you see water security. That's sort of a catch-all phrase that we want to make sure that we have a good relationship with our water assets, that we manage them properly in order to ensure, again, that they can be used for current and future generations. So these are some of the areas that the water accounts are able to inform. Now, water accounts in the context of the SNA and the SEEA, just to put this in the overall picture that we have. Within the economy, there are economic assets, which are part of the system of national accounts, and they include produced assets, you know, your factories, your, you know, cultivated biological resources here, you know. And then we also have the non-produced assets, which would include water because it's not part of the production process. And then there are also the financial assets. Within the SNA, remember that we only include within scope those assets that provide direct economic benefit to their owner. In the case of water, there might be certain environmental assets that actually have no economic benefit in the current accounting period, and they would not be included in the economic assets in the context of the SNA, but they would be included in environmental assets in the context of the SEEA. So one example of this might be that, you know, there is a lake in a very remote area of your country that nobody is visiting. There is no direct benefit or direct ownership of that lake and the benefits that it's generating. But, you know, from that lake, maybe there is a river that flows and then it eventually goes into farmland and providing water for that farmland, right? So even though within the context of the SNA, this particular asset would be out of scope, within the context of the SEEA, this natural resource, this lake that has no economic benefit, direct economic benefit would be included. So we want to be able to capture all of these environmental assets and then figure out basically how much are we removing from these environmental assets, how is the water being used within the economy, and then how does it flow back. All right, very good. This has a little bit of text here, but I thought it was quite important for us to get, again, an overall idea of what we are talking about. Within the water accounts, there are four main types of accounts that are considered. And again, many of you here are very familiar with these terms, and many of you have done some of the work here. So again, I would like to encourage you to either take the floor at the end of the presentation or write your views, your comments into the chat. We have the physical supply and use tables. So these physical supply and use tables measure the flow of water from the environment to the economy, flows within the economy, and flows from the environment, from the economy to the environment. So this is very much what we were talking about in the earlier presentation. Now we are focused on water. So how much water is being extracted from your rivers, let's say? How much of it is being used by agriculture? How much by manufacturing? How much by households? How much by obviously the you know, water distribution sector of the economy would probably be the one of the main abstractors of the water from the environment. And then how does it flow within the economy, right? How much of the water is distributed to the various sectors of the economy? How much goes to households? And then how does it flow back into the environment? We also try to measure, obviously, how much of that water is treated and the type of treatment that water goes through. The other type of account is the emission to water, and this is measuring the quantity of the pollutants that are added or removed from water. And again, this is quite important not only in the context of ecosystems, because emissions to water can pollute a particular ecosystem, make it difficult for that ecosystem to provide the services that it might have provided at a prior period, whether it's clean water or whether it's an environment for fish to grow in, and so on and so forth. So that is one important component of this emissions to water, but also for well-being, right? I mean, you know, maybe the water is too dirty to swim, and, you know, this particular water body actually was used for recreational purposes in the past as well. The third type of account is an asset account, and this is very much linked to the physical supply and use table, but the asset accounts are aimed at measuring the stock of the water resources and their changes over an accounting period. So asset account, we have an opening and we have a closing, and within that period, obviously, there are abstractions of water that are happening from the lakes, from the rivers, from the aquifers that you have in your country. And there are also inflows into those various assets, right? We have obviously rain that replenishes the lakes. We also have, you know, maybe ice that is melting, that is replenishing rivers. All of these flows we try to capture as best we can in an asset account. And you can already, I hope, appreciate that if you have asset accounts over over time, you will be able to trace how your water assets are changing over time. So if the levels in your lakes are decreasing at a very unsustainable rate, this will show up into the asset account from year to year, where you can trace, obviously, the overall volume of water and how that overall volume of water is changing. And last but not least, we also have the monetary supply and use for water. And this is very much focused on measuring rather who pays what to whom for water. For other types of environmental assets, such as coal or oil, there is also the valuation of the resource in the ground. But for water, it's a little bit different, because in just about all the countries, actually, water is sort of considered as a I don't want to say free resource, but that's how it operates in practical economic terms, that users do not actually pay for the value of water itself. It's rather the service that's being provided, which accounts for most of the costs. And in many countries, water supply and use is actually highly subsidized from various government entities. So it's quite difficult to do a valuation of the water resource in and of itself. Now, I should mention this note here, and many of you are very familiar with this, is that obviously we have talked about the link with national accounts being quite important, right? We want to be able to bring monetary information from the national accounts together with physical information from the supply and use. So we want to basically understand, agriculture sector, the value added is this many thousands of currency units or this many million currency units, but the agricultural sector is also using this many megaliters of water. And in order to bring that information together, obviously the time period that we're talking about has to be the same. So the accounting period has to be the same. And also the definition of what we mean by agriculture sector has to be the same, right? So same in the national accounts as in the system of environmental economic. So accounts for water are usually compiled at the national level annually. So this is, again, to match with the national accounts per the example that I just mentioned. But as many of the water experts here will tell us, is that one, water has a location and temporal side to it, right? Location and time. So when we talk about annually compiled accounts, we might miss some very important fluctuations that happen over the year. So it might be the case that during 3 months there is an abundance of water available, and then during the other 9 months of the year there is water scarcity because of rainfall patterns or snow melting patterns and so on and so forth. So it's quite important to be aware of this time component to it. The other thing is obviously location. Many of the countries, again, here with us are very, very big. So just because there are water resources available for farming in, let's say, the eastern half of your country, that might not, has no bearing on what is going on in the western half of the country, right? So you have to keep those in mind, the time and the location component to it. So the accounts can also be compiled at the watershed level to help with that, or other administrative areas as needed. And also they can be compiled for time periods that suit a little bit better some of these fluctuations and give a better idea of what the situation is, right? But in order for us to have connection with the national accounts, in order to us to have the connection with the other accounts, it is very much recommended that at least we do national level annually so that we can link that information together. Now, today we will focus on just two. We'll focus on physical supply and use over the next 20 minutes or so, and asset accounts. Here is the water system diagram. This is what we are trying to measure at the overall level. Within the country, I'll start with the bottom box, so to say, with the inland water resource system. We are very much concerned with three types of components to the inland water system. So this is soil water, surface water. Surface water is lakes, rivers, and also groundwater. So groundwater would be basically aquifers. very quickly, the difference between soil water and groundwater is that soil water is the water content that is found basically at the top level of the soil. This is not something like an aquifer that can be pumped out, right? It's just the moisture content of the soil water. And here you see that within the inland water resource system, rather, obviously we have certain flows, right? We have flows from the soil water into surface water or groundwater, and then obviously between aquifers and rivers and lakes, there might be flows between those. So already you see that, you know, the water system is quite complicated. There are already many flows happening within that system. We are not so concerned with those flows as far as the accounts are concerned in the context of physical supply and use, right? Because our aim is to, again, measure relationship between economy and the environment. Before moving to the economy, I should also mention that we have inflows, right? So within the country, there might be inflows of water that go into your surface water, for example. There might be a river that feeds into your river system that comes from outside your economy. And then obviously there are outflows. There are flows obviously to the sea, you know, when the river discharges and so on and so forth. And then other flows include also precipitation, right? The problem with water, as we know, is that it's always in motion. It's always moving. So precipitation also contributes and adds to soil water, surface water, and groundwater as well. Now, what are the things that we're trying to capture, right? We're trying to capture, one, the abstractions. So how much water is being removed from the inland water resources? Usually the abstraction happens by either the water supply industry or it happens directly by the various other industries, mainly agriculture, who might be using, let's say, water from a river and so on and so forth. So we want to capture how much water is being removed by the various sectors of the economy. And these are the blue arrows that you see there, going from the inland water system in water supply and also other industries as well. Now, after the water has been abstracted, obviously it becomes a product and it's within the economy and it flows within the economy. So you see that households rely on water from water supply. Sometimes households might as well themselves also extract water directly from the environment. But for the purposes of the SEEA, we consider that abstraction to be part of the water supply sector. And then once the water has been used by households and by the various industries, obviously it can either flow back into the environment as a return flow, or it can go into a treatment plant, into sewage, where it hopefully, you know, there is now technologies to remove some of the pollutants and to make the water cleaner before it is returned into the environment. Now, there are some other flows that happen as well, whether it's evaporation, right? This is an important component and thing to think about, especially now with the global climate change that's going on, that evaporation can actually reduce the availability of water resources significantly for many countries. So these are the type of flows that we want to measure. Again, how much water is removed from the environment and who is doing the removal? How is the water flowing within the economy? And then how does that water either is treated and go back to the environment, or how does that water return back to the environment? Now, some of the water obviously will be staying within the economy. Some of it will become part of products, right? Some of it will be used up, so to say, and that is part of the accounts as well. So these are the flows we want to capture. Now, some things to keep in mind. So these flows that we have discussed are organized in physical supply and use tables. And again, the structure here is the same as the system of national accounts supply and use tables. So this is where it starts from. These tables, which I'll show to you in a minute here, the columns of the tables are the who, right? Who is doing the supplying and the using? So in particular, what? Industries, household, and we also, in the context of environmental economic accounts, we have the environment, because the environment is where these assets are located, and this is where these residuals flow back to. The rows of the physical supply and use table measure the what, right? What are the flows? Those are the rows of the table. The unit of these is physical. Remember, it's in the title of this, so we're talking about physical supply and use tables. So the usual unit here is 1 million cubic meters, and I think for just about all countries that should be sufficient. But if you need some other level of it, thousands of cubic meters, or obviously you're free to use that. Now there is a structure to this that we will see here in a second, but that structure is just a starting point. It can be adapted to your country needs and data availability, and in particular on the level of disaggregation by industries. Many countries produce much more detailed supply and use table because they do have that information available. Maybe some of the flows, some of the rows might not be initially available, so there might be some aggregation in the rows that needs to happen at the beginning. The other piece of suggestion I would have for you is to first focus on the major flows, right? We know that agriculture will be a big user of water in your country. We also know that many services, in particular, if you have administration and all these sort of other groups of SNA, ISIC rather, industries, they do not use so much water. So maybe initially focus on some of the larger flows and then build out from there. Now, in doing the supply and use table, we do what is called double entry accounting. So hopefully the name gives it away here on what we are trying to do. For each supply, we must have a corresponding use. So for every flow that is reflected on a supply table, there must be an equal flow that is reflected on the use table. So somebody is supplying, if somebody is supplying, that somebody is using, right? So think of it that way, so that at the end of the day, the supply equals use, and we also have another identity that's quite important in this context, which is called the input-output identity, where the water that flows through a particular sector of the economy, the water that is supplied by a particular sector of the economy, must equal the water that is used by that particular sector of the economy, right? So these are good accounting identities that give structure to the work that we are doing and provide a framework that is consistent and coherent between supply and use. So here you have a very sort of visual description of the top level work that we have been talking about. So water comes either from the environment or from another economic unit, right? And then that water is used in economic activity and by households. And then as part of that use, obviously, we have evaporation that might occur, or the water can be incorporated into products. And then once the water has been used by the economic unit or the household, it either is supplied back to the environment or is supplied to another economic unit for further treatment or further use, right? So again, supply use in all of this. Let me show you the generic structure. Again, many of you are familiar with this, but it's good to sort of review it and get an overall sense of what we are trying to measure here. This is the supply table. This is the first half, the top half. This is very much at an aggregated level here, just so that we can show it on the screen first and foremost, but also to make it a little bit easier to see and to read. As you see, the columns are again industries, and the classification that we use is the same classification as in the national accounts, which is the International Standard Industry Classification. Currently it's version 4, I believe. We also include households. Obviously we have imports and exports, but we also include the environment as one of the columns, right? This is in addition to what a supply and use table in the national accounts would have. The first group here talks about the abstracted water. So abstracted water is defined as the amount of water that is removed from any source, either permanently or temporarily in a given period of time. Okay, and you can have this disaggregated by inland water sources and also other water sources such as ice and so on and so forth that could potentially provide the abstracted water, right? And keep in mind here that the only sources of abstracted water, the only place that can supply this is the environment. That's by definition, right? Because that's where the water is located. Now, the water can be either abstracted for distribution or it can be abstracted for own use. And this is captured in the second block here of the table, right? So the flows abstracted, then what purpose it is abstracted for. Group 3 there is dealing with how the water goes into treatment, right? So we are talking about wastewater and reused water in this case. So this is trying to capture the flows that happened within the economy, right? Because wastewater is sent from households and industries into wastewater treatment plant. The water can also be reused for different processes, so that is captured here as well. So these are flows that happen within the economy. And then the last two items here, let me briefly talk about them as well. 4.1 is block 4 rather, is the return flows of water. So these are flows from the economy to the environment. So in this case here, you'll see that the various sectors of the economy are supplying. And when we look at the use table in the next slide, you will see that the return flows go into the environment by definition. And then last but not least, we have this evaporated water, transpired water, and water incorporated into products. This tends to be a very small number, relatively speaking. Usually in many countries, it is calculated as the difference between the total water in the system and the water that flows back, basically, into the environment, right? So that's what's sort of left over that can inform this number 5 here. So what do I mean by this? Evaporation. I hope everybody is aware of evaporation of abstracted water. Transpiration, this has to do with plants and the water that is used by plants as part of their growth, and then water that is incorporated into products. I hope that is clear. In many cases, water becomes part of the product itself and is no longer available for future use. So this is the structure of the supply table. Again, the things to keep in mind, up top, the environment is the only one who can provide water, and then it's being used within the economy, and section 3 captures the various flows to either reused water or the wastewater that is sent to treatment, and then block 4 captures the flows back to the environment. So this is from a supply perspective, and let me briefly show you the use side of things. Again, you'll see here, let me just start with what I just mentioned on 4. Again, all the return flows happen to the environment, right? So all the returns, by definition, go to the environment. The other flows hopefully make sense and are captured in a good way here on the use side of the table. The other thing I wanted to highlight here, just to speed things up and for the sake of time, is that you'll see that households in block 1, households do not actually abstract any water. And in practice, it might be the case that households directly abstract water, right? They might have a well that they get water from an aquifer in their backyard. By convention, that activity is included with ISIC 36, water collection, treatment, and supply. But you might want to include a note in there to say that, okay, households actually do some of this extraction so that policymakers are aware. All right, we're running a bit short on time, so I apologize here for being a little bit slow with the presentation. But let me quickly also talk about asset accounts so that you are aware. This is an important topic, again, for many countries, even for both countries that are water rich, but also for countries that, suffer from water scarcity, because you want to manage your asset in a good way. And the way to do it is to understand how much water you have in your country. So this is, again, the definition of an asset is different in the SNA from the SEEA. I already talked about it, so let me skip this definition part. Again, keep in mind that water is always in motion, so it's a little bit different than timber or oil or coal that's been in the ground for, you know, millions of years and is not rapidly changing, right? Water cycle is being impacted by climate change, and also we have all these other just, you know, water cycle components. We do exclude water that's in the ocean, the seas, and the atmosphere from our scope. And again, I wanted to mention that we have issues with time and place that we need to consider as far as the assets are concerned as well. So maps are very useful in this context. Here is again a graph, just like we had a visual presentation of the flows of water that we captured in the physical supply and use table. These are the stocks that we want to capture within the asset accounts. So the way that the water flow occurs is that we have water on land, surface, or subsurface, and this is what our focus will be. So these are, again, your lakes, your rivers, your aquifers. There is evaporation, right, that occurs from these water surfaces that goes into the atmosphere, but also we have flows from the atmosphere into these surfaces, mainly in the form of rainwater. So we want to capture that. And then obviously there is water in the oceans and seas, and you see that from our inland water surfaces, there's only a one-way arrow into the ocean and sea. There's, you know, rivers are not coming from the ocean, right? It's just rivers going into the ocean or into the sea. So what we are trying to capture is these flows basically in an asset account. So how much water do we start with in these various assets, i.e. lakes, rivers, aquifers basically, and then during the accounting period, how much evaporation there is, how much rainfall is coming in, how much water is being discharged into the sea and ocean, and have this in a good way for the accounting period so that we have a good understanding of it. Now, being statisticians, we like classifications. So within the SEEA, there is a classification of inland water bodies. And you see here that we have surface water, which includes artificial reservoirs, lakes, rivers, and also glaciers and snow and ice. There is groundwater again. So groundwater, think about aquifers basically. And then soil water, which is basically the water content of the topsoil that is included. And soil water, obviously, it's quite important in the context of agriculture. This is the structure of the asset account. In physical terms, it is measured usually in, here it says cubic meters, but usually obviously in practice it'll be millions of cubic meters. This is just an example. You see that the columns are the various types of water resources, and this is again aggregated across your country, but it can be done at a different administrative level if you so desire. We start with an opening stock, and then we have a closing stock. And during the accounting period, there are additions and reductions that happen to that particular stock, and many countries might start initially to just have a total aggregate for addition and total aggregate for reduction, and then figure out what the closing stock is, and then more details are again added as you go along. But you can also prioritize the type of water resources that again are more important for your country, whether it's lakes or rivers or groundwater or soil water. So you have choices here as far as the structures is concerned. And you know, some of these types of water resources might not be so relevant for your country. I think it is quite important in particular for the abstraction to talk about water power, hydropower generation rather. So if you have information on that, I think it would be quite useful to actually understand how much of the water is being actually used for that particular purpose. I think the entries on the rows I hope are fairly clear, but happy to answer any questions you might have on the various flows that we include. But at the top level, again, this is aggregated at the national level, usually over the accounting period of 1 year. And you can start by just opening and closing stocks and then populate more and more detail as you have more and more data resources that become available. Let me not, for the sake of time here, because we are running short, let me not talk too much about combined presentations, but let me briefly mention it because it's quite important in the context of what we're doing. One of the main advantages of the accounts, obviously, is, as you have probably become tired of hearing me say now, is the coherence and consistency with the national accounts. So we can bring together monetary information and physical information to produce what are called combined presentations. These combined presentations are helpful to calculate indicators. They're also helpful for economic modeling. So this is quite an important topic that many people rely on as far as doing some of these GCE modeling, general equilibrium modeling in economics to figure out the impacts on the various environmental assets from different economic policies. Obviously, they are also helpful in what are called environmentally extended input-output tables. Many of the countries here already are producing input-output tables. That is quite easy to do with the environmental data that can be added from a physical supply and use table. Here is an example of a combined presentation. Again, it brings together information on monetary flows, on employment you have here, gross value added, obviously water supply and use, and then also fixed assets for water to just provide an overall view of the situation of managing water resources in your country. And some of these combined presentations can easily lead to some of these indicators that we've been talking about, in particular for the SDGs, when we are talking about water efficiency, which is talking about bringing together information on value added with information on water use by the sectors of the economy. Now, common data sources, as you have seen here, and again, to tie it back to the introduction by our colleague from ROSSTAT on the work that they have been doing from Ms. Shashlova, there are many data sources that need to be brought together. So survey data, administrative data, hydrological and meteorological data obviously is important, research data. Dr. Sharma in her remarks mentioned, using some of these newer data sources that are quite important. So in many countries, for example, in order to measure the level of water in the rivers and the lakes, they use satellite data, right? So that big data can be used as an input to calculating how much water is in your various water assets, and obviously that data is updated on a regular manner and can help with producing these accounts. And I wanted to mention this just from a statistical perspective, how important it is that we have good metadata and good quality assurance. Metadata is something that we discuss more and more now, since the data that official statisticians are producing is much more prominent, much more publicly visible now as opposed to in the past. So it's important that metadata is put together in order to explain to the users how the account was put together, but also some of the limitations and also some of the things that they need to be aware of in using the information. And quality assurance goes without saying. It's an important thing that we do with our everyday statistical processes, but keep that in mind as you put together the accounts. Data collection strategy, I think, as you have seen, there is a lot. And this is not meant to overwhelm you, but it's to show you the breadth and the depth of what is possible. So you do not have to do everything all at once. It's important to determine the data needs that you have. It's important to then review what existing water data you have and then determine the priorities based on that. I think collaboration for water, in particular with ministries of water, agriculture are very, very important here. The water management institutes in your group, in your countries rather, are quite crucial in that, and then also devise a data collection strategy and then carry on from there. I think many of you might also have heard the GBSPM, the Generic Business Statistical Production Model. I hope I got the acronym right. But GBSPM is also another tool that you can use in order to organize yourselves in a good and efficient way. Okay. I apologize for taking a lot more than I planned on this. I think it was a lot of information there to share with everybody. So let me thank you for your patience and for being here with us. I already see a couple of questions on online here that I can try to briefly answer. Do you know examples of any countries where Part 5 is calculated directly? So I do not know. Thank you for that question. I do not know of any countries that calculate directly Part 5. I think evaporation, yes, there is information on. But transpiration and also water that is used into products, it usually is very small. So it's just usually the difference between the total and 1 through 4. But I personally do not know because it's just, as you can imagine, there are a lot of products that use very little water, right? That aggregating that across is quite difficult. So I do not personally know. Tomorrow will be a good chance to raise this question again. Actually, we will have, many of you might know Short Stenau from Statistics Netherlands, and you know, we can bring this up with him as well if he knows any countries. So could you comment how correctly, in your opinion, to use data on water accounts to calculate SDG 6.4.1, dynamic of water use? So yes, so thank you for this question. So the accounts are tailor-made for calculating water efficiency. You have to obviously understand and be careful about what's in and what's out. You know, here we mentioned fresh water, which fresh water would include, right, the lakes and the rivers and the streams. So those would be the freshwater resources that are included in that calculation. And then obviously from the national accounts, we can bring the information on GDP to calculate the efficiency. The added advantage of the accounts is that we can also do this by different sectors of the economy, right? So we can do the calculation of water use efficiency by the various sectors of the economy in your country. So you not only have it for the total economy, but you can also understand the fluctuations over time between, say, agriculture, manufacturing, services, and so on and so forth. So, so yes, please, you can rely on a physical supply and use table to inform that indicator. And I think, you know, within the context of this, FAO is custodian, I believe, to 6.4.1. So the Food and Agriculture Organization is custodian. If you look at the metadata, you can pick the right components from the account and include those in the calculation for that indicator. So thank you, Igor, for sharing the link to the work that you have done in Russia on this. Thank you for sharing. So I know we're 1 minute, but I would like to see if anybody would like to take the floor to share any comments, views, thoughts that you might have. Okay. Again, let me again thank you for joining us today. I know it was a little bit of a marathon with only me talking today, but we are very excited. Tomorrow, as you have seen from the agenda, we will have Short and Joachim, who are two of the people that contributed greatly to the new standard on ecosystem accounts. And they'll talk about ecosystem extent, how do we measure that, and ecosystem condition, how do we go about measuring that. So we have, we've been lucky enough to line up some of the world-renowned experts in the area of ecosystem accounts. So I hope you will be joining us then. If you have any questions in the meanwhile, please do send them to us via email. We'll be happy to answer those as we get them. So for now, let's close our session for today. Again, thank you for joining us. Many thanks and apologies to the interpreters. I know it was a little bit fast at times, so thank you for your hard work and helping us with this. I know the participants appreciate it as well. So we very much look forward to seeing you tomorrow, everybody. Take care and bye-bye.